Good morning, everyone. We are live. It is the February 16th, 2024 edition of the Abel Marketing Facebook Live. And I have a bit of a different guest today, as I shared on our social media page and in some of my marketing groups that I'm in. I have Eli from TechSoup Connect BC with me. Eli, how are you?
Great. Thank you.
So Eli and I have been working together since 2020. And so I, at the end of one role, was looking to gain some volunteer experience and keep my social media marketing skills and chops, for lack of a better term, sharp while I was looking for my next career path. And then things changed with the pandemic. But I stayed involved with TechSoup, and I'm just going to share the TechSoup Western Canada link in our chat. So Eli and I now, as of, I guess it's 4 years later, isn't it? We're still hosting TechSoup events. We survived the pandemic by hosting them virtually like this. We moved back to events in 2023 with what I think is some great success. And so 2024, I think, Eli, maybe you can answer this question, is going to continue along with what people like to call the hybrid event model.
I think that's right. At the moment, we're kind of doing primarily online events with mixing in the occasional in-person event. And when we get to those in-person events, we'll try and bring at least the live stream and perhaps a chat moderator into that experience as well.
Yeah, and I just actually shared the next link. I'm going to share this page. Our last talk was the top technology trends for nonprofits in 2024. And I must say, every year that we do that, that's the one I think I get the most excited about, because you can see the number of sort of, you can explain a little bit more how that works, because it's really valuable, I think, for people who work in nonprofits, but I think it's just valuable for any organization or company that has to market itself. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the top technology trends in nonprofits?
Sure. So we have a different theme or topic for each month. But as you talked about, one of our signature models is this lightning talk style event where we bring in 8 to 10 experts to give these quick 5-minute thought bombs where they get to say, here's the thing that we think nonprofits and social enterprises should really focus on when they're exploring technology in the coming year.
Right. Right.
And because we've got 10 presenters, it means we're bringing 10 interesting new ideas to people, and the audience really laps it up, and it's really risk-free because
right.
unlike that presentation where maybe you get a dead presenter and now you're stuck with them for 45 minutes. In this case,
right.
If we get someone who just doesn't have the right energy for the event that day, that's fine. 5 minutes on, we're on to the next one. Boom, boom, boom. And this event actually is really great for us as organizers in two key ways. And therefore, I think it's actually potentially a kind of model other people doing their other work, no matter what their focus, their sector is, can adopt. One thing that's really useful about this 5-minute format is you've just created your next month's worth of social media marketing and promotional content. Because all you need to do is take that video and take a little knife and go slice, 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 slice. And now you've got video clips that you can upload into all the social channels, tag that presenter, let them know that they were loved and appreciated. And then, of course, always link back into your own property. So that's really great because it takes something that's almost sized really well for social media already, and then you just get to sort of syndicate it out into your channels. The other part of this is basically the test training ground for all of our events for the next year, because coming up with an event every month can be hard. And you're like, is that presenter even going to be any good? Are they going to be articulate? Are they going to have the right energy? And the best way to test them is to give them these little 5-minute slots, and then we'll go to the best of those people and say, remember how amazing that great event was? Why don't you come back and do the full 45-minute version with us, go deeper into those topics, those subjects in one of our subsequent events. So this is also the way we basically are sourcing and testing out content ideas that we can bring into our full-fledged events for the rest of the year. So this one event basically allows us to set the agenda for a whole year.
Right. And that's really important too, right? Because when I joined, I mean, I didn't really have much experience working with nonprofits or working in a nonprofit. I mean, I did a 9-month contract. I just finished working for a nonprofit. But um, one of the things that's interesting is you don't realize, I don't think, when you're in a nonprofit, especially if it's small, is how much work there is to do and how there's so few people resources. So I think organizations often struggle with what they should be doing to market the nonprofit. And so for me, when I see these topics and I see these presenters, I see that, you know, there's some real opportunity here to learn about this stuff and then take it back and apply it to the organization that you work for.
I think that's right. So when I come back to like how did I get involved with these kinds of meetups and events to start with?
Right.
Initially I came at that because I was new in town, didn't know anyone, and I was
Right.
kind of looking to say like, where are geeks who care about things? Discovered this meetup, got very excited, but here I am 12 years later, still involved with
Wow,
it
12 years is a
because
long time.
it solves these core needs for me,
Right.
which is basically how do I build a reputation? How do I have a calling card that I own rather than is tied to a particular job or client I might have? How do I have an excuse that I can talk to anyone in town who might be interesting? People who maybe aren't going to give me 30 minutes of their time because they don't really know who I am. But now I've got
Right.
this calling card. And I'm saying, like, I'm going to put you on this panel with other smart people you know.
Right.
And it's my way to basically open the door and have a conversation with, frankly, almost anyone who is doing interesting, innovative work. I now have a way to start a conversation with them. And then finally, for me, as someone who, if you put me in a room, I'm going to be a little bit awkward and say, like, how do I talk with these other people in the room?
Right.
I'm a terrible networker. But if you change that whole model and say, like, you're not here to network, you're here to host. Your job is to talk to everyone and welcome them.
Right.
For me, that
Right.
was the mind hack, which is like being the host of a meetup allowed me to get sort of out of that place where I was like a bad, uncomfortable networker because I didn't quite know what I had to do. And but now as a host, I have a clear job, a clear role. And I'm like, oh,
Right.
it was easy. Let me go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I know we talked about, excuse me, a list of sort of questions prior to this, and I had sort of have a list of set questions, and I said like, why did you get involved with TechSoup Connect? Is your first question is sort of the first question we had as an outline. So the next question is, what's your background then? I guess with volunteer management and nonprofits, because I think when you and I first met, you were working with the David Suzuki Foundation.
Totally. Yeah. So I, like most people, have an unclear, you know, path that just sort of, wandered along the garden path and had surprises along the way.
Right.
So going way back to me, being 20 in Edmonton,
Oh
I
wow.
just wanted to
Okay.
go to the folk music festival, but I was 20, didn't have any money. So I said, I'm going to volunteer.
Right.
Um, did that for a couple summers. And then one day, basically, the people in charge said, we're looking for a summer student. And I'm like, you mean you would pay me to hang out here and like help support the people building out this little festival? And
Right.
so I put up my hand, and suddenly it was like 7 summers later, and I was still that
Wow.
summer
That's
student.
awesome, man.
And so through that, basically, that was my introduction to project
Okay.
management, volunteer management,
Right.
festival production, all of that. And so it was basically, I went to university, got a history degree, but that was
Right.
just an excuse to have my summer student job because I had to be a student. So I
Right.
extended my university career out to 7.5 years so I could extend
Nice.
out my fun summer job. This is financially a terrible idea. I do not recommend it,
Mm.
but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And so here I was now, someone who had this
Right.
experience managing teams of like up to 100 volunteers to go out into a field, put up tents, and sort of make a little city for these festivals. And so through that, eventually I was sitting in the office one day covering for my boss who was on holidays, and he got an email from a former employee saying like, hey, we're in Vancouver. I'm at the David Suzuki Foundation. We're looking for someone to basically manage a tour, take David on a bus across the country.
Oh, wow.
And that was actually intended for my boss, but he wasn't there. So I put up my hand and said, how about me? And I was able to sort of convince them that I was the right fit for that, because I spent my prior 3 years working for Canadian Idol, working with their production team to basically help them find and manage the locations and volunteers during that sort of the audition prep process when they cross the country and go to city to sort of find talent for those coming years. That was just something I took on for a month or two because I was bored, and a friend said, let's do this thing. Little did I know that would open up a whole new door, a whole new career. And so,
that's a really interesting career path. That's a really interesting career path.
I ended up in Vancouver to manage this tour, did that for 3 months. And at the end of that, once you've been stuck on a bus for a long time, you get to form relationships with some of the people in charge. And through that, I learned that their volunteer manager had been on long-term sick leave. And I'm like, that seems like a terrible missed opportunity. And so I took on a 6-month contract. And then while I was there, because I'd always been a little bit nerdy, I sort of discovered like, oh, wait, you've got this like online team, but there's only one person, and you don't really have the capacity to like send an email campaign. And no one was exploring this new stuff, this social media stuff that was just emerging as Facebook went fully live around that same time. And I sort of insinuated myself into this team, and eventually was leading a team of about 5 people and 3 interns, basically running a digital marketing shop internally for the nonprofit.
Right.
And that was sort of how I established myself in Vancouver. The last step is, through all that time, I've been getting involved with this Tech for Good meetup. And that had been my volunteer gig for those prior 5 years.
Right.
But eventually, like as I was getting a little bit burnt out in the Suzuki Foundation, I got a message from TechSoup, who sort of was managing this global network of Tech for Good meetups, to say, we're looking for someone who could support our 100 other volunteer chapters across the world to plan their own Tech for Good events in their community. And I, of course, said, please let that be me. Like, I've been doing this thing for 5 years. This is the coolest. And that's what I did for the next 8 years. And that's kind of how you and I initially got to know.
That's such an interesting story. You describe it so well. And I think one of the questions I would ask, I know we have a set list of questions, is tell us a little more about the purpose of TechSoup, because people always ask me when I volunteer. And I always sort of say, well, it's helping nonprofits get access to technology, but I think it's a lot more than that. I mean, we've talked about the whole software piece, and for people who follow us know, and we've really aligned with a company, Vancouver company like Hootsuite, which I've used the Hootsuite social media management dashboard. Like at the beginning, it's basically helping you manage your social media channels, right? That's a very crude way of saying it, but it's interesting how we've aligned with a Vancouver company like that, right? Because there's, I think, a lot of pressure on organizations, and having seen what we do with TechSoup and work with nonprofits, to use social media as a channel, right? But then they often don't understand that, why are you using it as a channel? Because I think it's there, I mean, obviously for education purposes, and you want to say brand awareness, but I don't think a lot of nonprofits realize how powerful a tool it is to use for fundraising.
So the big picture is, TechSoup is, as you said, a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits get access to and use technology. And I'll be honest, when I first discovered TechSoup, I'm like, well, that clearly must be a scam. Like, you mean you just go to them and they're going to give you free access to software? Like, how does that work? But TechSoup is essentially at its heart a social enterprise, structured as a nonprofit. So what they've done is they've partnered with about 150 of the major technology companies in the world, and said to them, we can help you scale and grow your charitable giving programs to go global. And the way that works essentially is this idea of, well, once we do the due diligence of saying, like, in our platform, yes, we know you're a nonprofit, we know your budget size, we know your focus area, we know these criteria. Once we've done that once, we can use that exact same approval credential for any of the other 120 partners. So it's a fair bit of work the first time to say, like, is this organization applying who may be in Zambia or could be in Portugal. Like, are they a valid nonprofit? Do they meet all these criteria? And
Right.
once we've done that, then they can say like, oh, I'd like these 10 licenses from Microsoft, please. And then once you're done that, you're like, oh, actually, I also want these Asana licenses for my project management. And then you're like, after that, you're like, actually, I'd also love to use Google Suite so I can, set up my own email for my whole board and the rest of my program. And so basically the way that works is usually either the validation cost around that is charged either to the nonprofit in some cases, who are like, here's $10, open up my discount code. Or
Right.
sometimes the company itself will say, hey, TechSoup, thanks for the approval. Here's a couple bucks just to cover the overhead fees of sort of managing this donation program. And so through that, TechSoup has now served about 1.4-ish million nonprofits, saved the sector about $16 billion in list value, and has at this point been able to serve nonprofits in essentially every country in the world. So it's this wildly huge, powerful organization with basically partners in every country. So there is a TechSoup Canada, there's a TechSoup US, there's a TechSoup
Right.
in basically every country except for like the places the US government won't allow us, North Korea, Syria,
Yeah. Right.
basically everywhere else, though, you'll
Right.
be able to find a TechSoup to support you there. So that's kind of what TechSoup does, and that's how it funds itself. But it is this really powerful thing to sort of reduce the cost of entry to this powerful tool, which is software and hardware that nonprofits need to scale up and allow themselves to be more effective and more efficient.
Right. Okay. And I've actually shared it here on the Facebook Live. It's www.techsoup.ca for those of you
Totally.
in
And if you want
Canada.
to, if you're not in Canada, if you're streaming in from somewhere else, if you
Right.
went to TechSoup.global, you get a drop down to find wherever your local TechSoup is in your country.
Right. Okay. So a couple more things for you. One of the things that we talked about sort of prior to this was how does one become a volunteer with TechSoup? Because I kind of did it on a whim, looking for some opportunity or just some way to keep my skills sharp, or get some event experience or event organizing experience, and it's turned into so much more for me. And it's been 4 years, right? And now I'm at the point where I don't really want to leave it because I feel like I'm gonna miss out on something. So how does one reach out to you if you're, say, in the Vancouver area or in BC, um, to get involved?
Well, gosh, basically, if you want to get involved, and we're always looking for new talent to get involved with the team,
Right.
whether that's someone who's going to be a chat moderator in one of our online events, maybe
Right.
you want to do some blogging, do a write up of like some of the insights that came out of one of these events. Maybe you want to be an event producer, and you're like, I have a great topic, and I know the right person who can be a guest presenter. I want to produce, say, 2 events a year. Get in touch with us, and you'll see exactly that there is at the bottom of that TechSoup Western Canada page, there's going to
Right.
be
Right.
a contact us link, and that's probably the very best way to reach out. And then we'll have a quick conversation and say, what do you want to see in the world? What do you want to get done? And
Right.
we will find a way that we can all collaborate and scheme and plot together. So that's what happens if you're in BC and there's an existing chapter. But say you're streaming in from, say, Calgary or something like that. You're like,
Right.
well, I would also like to get involved. At that point, what I'm going to say to you is like, the very best way to get involved is actually to become the host of your own chapter. It's not that intimidating. It's not that frightening, but it is a powerful thing for you as you want to sort of build your network, grow your career.
Right.
Because it is not a very centrally managed program. It really is something that you get to own and shape yourself. So as a volunteer, you're going to select the topics, the timing, the
Right.
date. You're going to be the public face for that group. And so
Right.
if you want to have an excuse to talk to all the social innovators in your community, build this huge reputation and get to know everyone else in that same ecosystem, because now you're the event host. You're the person who opens up every event.
Right.
You should just go to events.techsoup.org, and there is a become a chapter link there. And they will hook you up with the community manager who can then take you through the journey of like, what would it take to start up your own chapter? But the answer is come up with 3 event ideas, propose some dates, and that's it. Basically, off you go.
Right.
Like, make it happen.
Right. Right. Okay, so a couple more things for you. We discussed this out there. I know I asked you what in my little form there, what's the most exciting project you've done to date? So the digital nonprofit conference, you mentioned that. So why don't you talk about that? And I think when I joined in 2020, obviously pre-pandemic, right before the pandemic, I think you had done the digital nonprofit, but then it didn't survive, or I had
We
seen
had
it.
wrapped one up recently, but yeah, obviously we canceled the next one as we were coming into the COVID times. We're like, okay, well, that's not going to happen.
Right.
So what it is we've been doing these free monthly meetups for 12, 13 years. We've got a list of 2,000 people. We're having a good time, building up the tech skills of local nonprofit staffers. But what we kept on hearing from those staffers is this is all really fabulous. I'm excited, but someone needs to convince my boss that this is worth
Mm,
an investment. This is worth our time.
right.
And they said, but let's be honest, your boss is never going to show up for an event at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night. They got a family. They got to go back there. They're looking to not have a practitioner's standpoint, but rather a big picture of an organizational strategic perspective. And so to meet that need, we went and created an annual 1-day
Right.
conference. Um, Unlike our other events, this was a paid event. We'd usually go and like find a
Okay.
conference center, bring in food and lunch, guest presenters from out of town, make it a bit
Wow.
fancier, more polished. And usually we'd get about, say, 200 to 300 people showing up. So this
That's
was a
awesome.
big signature event, super fun, also a lot of work, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff,
Right.
selling
Right.
tickets. So
Right.
yeah, it's certainly a lot more hustle. So we've taken a little bit of a break for the last couple of years as we've reassessed people's appetite for in-person events and conferences in this post-COVID times.
Right.
But certainly it's this thing we can point to and say, like, this is something where, we put together this beautiful event where we brought in, like, case studies and experts from across North America who could come and guide nonprofit leadership on how they can actually think about bringing digital strategy into their core organizational like mission.
Interesting. I'd be curious to know I mean, there's so many conferences like this in Vancouver now. And I mean, I was part of something called Northern Voice years ago,
Mhm.
2011, 2012, 2013. There was probably overlap of people involved in that conference and digital nonprofit. The Northern Voice conference hasn't been done since 2013. And I've become good friends with the organizers. But I see so many of these little conferences popping up. So I wonder if maybe the digital nonprofit conference that you held was a bit sort of ahead of its time. I'd be curious to see what would happen if it came back again in 2024, 2025. I know it's a huge endeavor to do it, but um, I wonder now post pandemic, we talk so much about, oh God, I don't even know if we talked about it on the air or in one of the TechSoup conferences, but what the status of nonprofits would be now post pandemic with digital adoption of certain technologies, right? Because I think the pandemic forced us to do that, but I'd be curious to see if they stayed with that or moved to adopt stuff to do with digital technology, and have they swung back now that the pandemic is over, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have a great sense of that. I do think you're absolutely right that we like jumped forward 3 years faster than we would have just around like people's investment in infrastructure. When COVID first
Right.
hit, a large percentage of the organizations I talked to, their
Right.
laptops didn't even have a camera or a speaker into them. They didn't have that
Yeah.
ability, so we were on the phone. It used to be really hard to get someone to join you on Zoom.
Yeah.
Those
Right.
days are done. So there's been some big, like, just sort of the core base level of the technical literacy has definitely changed. Everyone's now in a Slack or a Teams chat. Like, even the organizations where it never worked before, like at TechSoup, we spent years and years, trying different kinds of chat apps, and none of them ever really stuck.
Right.
But finally, when COVID came and most of the people were no longer in an office together, now suddenly, they adopted Slack, and now you pull it from their hands, like dead hands screaming, like they are just never going to let go of some of these platforms now that it's in there. As for at like the base level organizational program delivery, I think that evolution is still going, but we've
Right.
talked to so many organizations that walked into COVID and they were a food bank that was still running everything on pieces of paper.
Wow.
And that has transitioned. I think there are much fewer organizations that are still
Right.
in the manual process. Like they're all now using databases so they can update their inventory. They are all
Right.
now have online systems for volunteer management and hour tracking. They're not just having people just fill out a piece of paper and then having someone else come back later and saying, like, can I decode these chicken scratches? Like, what did it all mean? So there has been a big change around all of us. Just the ability, the comfort of people to make online payments. There was still a percentage of the population who was uncomfortable making any kind of online payment or transaction up to in the pre-COVID time. But now I think donors don't have that. Even more elderly donors who would have preferred to keep writing checks have sort of said like, okay, actually because I'm so comfortable with having ordered food online during COVID, now they are actually way more comfortable saying like, oh yeah, I actually can also make a donation in that place. So I
Right.
think it's moved everyone's like base level comfort,
Right.
but I don't think there's been ultimately a radical revolution. I think what we've just seen is the laggards, if they didn't catch up, they certainly made a big leap forward. That's, I think, where we saw
Right.
the biggest change. It wasn't like the top level digital native organizations that have had a revolution in their work, but rather those service level organizations that were running very old school are now, sort of back at a place. Now they're only 5 years
Right.
behind, not 10 years behind, which is, a big jump.
It is. It is. Okay. So thanks, Eli. We just want to wrap it up there. I know we said about a 20, 25-minute call or a little live stream in half an hour, and you've given us so much information to dig through. I've dropped the links to TechSoup in the chat here so people can see those when they see this video live on Facebook. We have www.techsoup.ca, and we have the link for the chapter that is our chapter.
Exactly. With a
But
very long URL that you don't want.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I want to thank you again, and we're going to wrap it up there, and I'll talk to everyone soon.
Such a pleasure. And thank you, Ben. Catch you
Thanks.
all.
Take care.